Hi and welcome, and we continue with the UB04 training. In this video, we're going to cover the UB04 charge entry, batching, and working rejections. So the agenda for today, we start with the welcome, then the UB04 institutional charge training, and then in the end, we'll have time for questions. So these are the details that we're going to cover. Entering UB04 institutional claim, edit the UB04 claim, batch, submit, or print the UB04 claims. And we're going to look at the claims workbench, how to work rejections for any institutional claims that were submitted. So let's begin the training. So to open the UB04 charge entry screen, navigate to the charges menu, and on the charges menu you have UB04 charge entry. Click on that, and that'll open up into the UB04 charge entry as a full window. This screen will open up for you. Now once you have the screen open, click on the patient field and type in the patient for whom you want the charge to be entered. So I'll type in a patient name, and then I'll select the patient. Now once a patient is selected, you can see it shows the patient's case number on the left hand side. If you can either click on the case number, or you can click on the plus symbol to add the new charge. Also, when you create charges, those charges will start showing up on this pane. The date of service of those charges will start showing up on this section. And that's how you can click to make changes or modifications to charges. So we'll be looking at that in just a little bit. But first, let's look at how you can enter a charge. So either hit the plus here or select this case. Click on this case and you'll get a blank UB04 charge entry screen. Now once the screen opens up, at the top you can see the patient's name. Anytime you want to go to the patient screen, you can click here and it would open up the patient screen for you, the patient edit screen. Next, you can see the patient's name, the accounting date, and on the right of it is a rendering provider. Here you want to select the provider that you want to bill this claim for. So you select the provider, so select one of the providers here. Next, you want to enter the type of bill. Now, depending on what billing type it is, you would type this in to this field. You can either type it in, or you can double click on this field and you can get from a list of common UB04 type of bills. Now always remember, when you're typing in or selecting here, always prefix it with a 0. So you want to type in 0731, for example. If your billing type is 731, always prefix it with a 0. So the billing type actually signifies your type of facility and what billing it is, whether it's a new patient, follow-up patient, and that is what the billing type would represent. So you would want to type in the type of bill that you would need to use for this charge. Next is the case. You can click here and select the case. Now this patient, if you go to this patient screen, you would see that, or if I open up this patient screen, and you can see this patient has got two primary insurances. One is the institutional, the other is a professional. And this patient actually has three cases, one cash case and two insurance cases. The two insurance cases, one of them is a professional, the other is a institutional. But you would notice here that only the institutional case came up for this patient, because so though this patient has got three cases, it is just the institutional case that will come up on the screen. So you have to make sure that if a patient, you have added a patient, and let's say if you do a mix of institutional and professional billing, you got to make sure that the institutional case is also added for the patient. Once you have got the case selected, um, you can see the primary, secondary, tertiary name of case and what type of case it is. You also have the add edit option. If you want to add an institutional case or edit an existing case, you can use the add edit for that. Next is a statement covers period, and you can enter the date that the statement is for, or date of this bill. So it can be date or date range. Next, you want to enter the admission date. So the admission date is entered into this field. That is, if it is an inpatient service, you would have to enter the admission date here, and we can enter the admission date into this field. Next is the admission hour. The admission hour always is two digits, and it has to be entered in a 24-hour format. So let's say if it was 11 a.m., I would type in 11, or if it is 2 p.m., you want to type in 1400, or just 14, and because it's two digit. Now the admission type would signify how the admission, or how it was admitted. So you want to double click here and you'll get a list from which you can select. So the type of admission is what you can select from this list. Next, the admission source is 15, which is not a pick list. You have to type in this field, and the source of admission is whether it's a physician referral for 1, 2 for clinic referral, 3 for HMO referral, or maybe 9, where if you do not have the information, you can enter 9 into the field. But it's always single digit. So you'll have 1 to 9 that you can typically select for the source. Next, the 16 is the discharge hour. The discharge hour, just as for the admission hour, you will have to enter it in the 24-hour format, and it's 2 digits. So if a discharge has not been done, you can leave this blank. Next is the 17, which is the status code, and this is the discharge status code. Now, if the patient has not been discharged, you can select, like, you can enter 30 saying still a patient, or if the patient has been discharged, then you can typically pick or type in there whether it's been discharged to home or discharged to another facility. Depending on which type it is, you have these different options. You can, or you would have to enter the appropriate status code in there. So I'm going to enter 30, which is still a patient. Then you have condition codes that you have to enter. It may be required, may not be required. These are all optional fields. So if it is necessary for your billing, you want to enter the condition codes and double click on this field, and you can see you get a list of condition codes that you can select from. Similar to that, you also have occurrence code. So if you want to present some occurrence and dates, and as well as incidents, you can actually enter them into this field. So here too, if you double click, you get a common list of occurrence codes that you can select from. So for example, if you want to report like 11 for onset of illness, you can type in 11 and put the date in there. Or if there was a date of discharge or a date of treatment started or date of surgery, these are different things that you can report. Or if you want to report on the claim, you can enter that and enter the date for that in the next field. So you can 31 to 33 is occurrence, where 31 to 34 is occurrence, and 35 and 36 are occurrence span. So, which is if it's a span from and through, you can enter it here. But if it's a single date, you want to enter it into the occurrence date. Now, if there's an authorization number that you want to enter, you can enter it into the 63. If there is an authorization number that is added onto the patient, you can select that patient authorization number. When you click here, you would see that authorization number come up for this come up on this field. This patient may have an authorization added, but you may still not see it here because that authorization that may be added is not for this exact pair. You have to make sure that the authorization is added for this pair itself. So when you're adding the authorization, you would have to select that insurance on the authorization field. The next is a document control number, and you've got 64, which is A and B for document control number. And you can enter here a previous claim reference number. If you're sending this as a corrected claim, you can enter the previous claims number here, and this will be taken as a corrected claim. The system will send the resubmission code, which as a corrected or a replacement claim resubmission code would be used when you put in any value in this field. The 67 start with the principal and other diagnosis codes, and this is where you can type in a diagnosis code. You can type in the diagnosis code and hit the down arrow key to select from the list. So type in a partial code, and you can hit the down arrow key to select that from the list. Or you can also you can type in the text. You can type in the text and also hit the down arrow key to pick from the list. Similar to that, you can enter additional diagnosis codes. There is the additional principal and other diagnosis. You can enter, there are fields here for entering more diagnosis codes as well. Now there's also an ICD-10 lookup. If you click here, it brings up a lookup screen, and you can easily search for ICD-10 diagnosis over here. You want to click on the third tab, which is ICD-10 search. You can search for diagnosis code. Just type in. You can also use random text keywords, that is, to search for diagnosis codes. You can just put your random keywords in here and find the diagnosis code, which you can click to select it. Once selected, you would click to show it up for you, and then once shown, you can check the ones that you want to select and hit the add to have it added. If there are more diagnosis codes then you want to add from here, you can then do the next search and then also select the next one. So all those that will be checked, that way when you hit the add to use UB04 button, after you've finished searching all the diagnoses that you need, all of them will be added together to the UB04 charge entry screen. There's also an ICD-10 index tab where diagnosis codes are sorted by their description, and you can also find diagnosis codes from this ICD-10 index tab as well. So once the diagnoses are entered, we can now go down to the right. We'll go to the value code screen, the value code field, and you can enter value code amount. Sometimes certain insurances may request, or you may want to present the value code and amount. So if that is needed, you would have to enter it into this field, value code and amount. So there's 39, 40, and 41, which you can use for entering value codes and amounts. Now we come down to 69. If this was admission, you want to enter the admit DX in here. So you would enter the admit DX into that field, and when the patient got admitted or came to the facility, what was the reason for that patient to come into the facility? You can enter it in 70, which is a patient reason DX, A, B, C. You've got 3 fields there to enter that. You also have 74 here for principal procedure, which is you have to enter the ICD code that identifies the principal procedure that was performed. And you have to enter the date as well for that. So the ICD code that signifies why that principal procedure was performed is what you would enter here. You have 74, and then you have you have A, B, C here, which is for entering any other additional codes, ICD codes. If you want to enter them, you can enter them into this field with the date. Next, we come over to the line area, and this is where you can type in the revenue code and other information. So when you type in the revenue code, you can also double click here, and kind of shows you some of the common revenue codes. And revenue codes, as we looked at in the type of bill, also has to be prefixed with a 0. So you can see that there are some revenue codes, common ones, that you can pick from the list. If there's something that you want to type in here, you can just type that into the rev code field. The HCPCS code is brought from the fee schedule, and you type in the HCPCS code and it shows from the fee schedule, and you can pick and select from the fee schedule. Now always note that the HCPCS code is what brings the amounts. So the amounts are brought from the HCPCS codes and not from the revenue code. So you want to have the code in your fee schedule, and then bring that code from the fee schedule. Now the HCPCS codes are not mandatory, they are optional, so you can even keep a blank HCPCS code here, and you can fill in the rest of the information manually too. Then you have the date of service. Whatever date that you picked on the statement covers period, you will see that automatically copy from there to here. But if you want to change the date, you can do that. Then you have got the modifier. You can enter a modifier if needed. And you can enter the number of units, and of course if you change the units based on what you have on the fee schedule, it'll change the amount. You also have the option here to select F2 for international units, and days. DA is for days, so if it's an inpatient residential where the patient was seen and had to stay in a facility for the procedure, then you want to enter the days into this field. You can also enter the non-covered charges if you want that to go out on the claim. And once you get the payments applied, you can see the paid and adjustment amount, or if you want to adjust off some amount, you can also adjust off the amount from here. Once a charge is created, that's when you can adjust off the amount. When you're doing that, you can also pick an adjustment reason. Now to add the new line, you want to click on the plus to add a new line. So you can hit plus and it'll add a new line. The bill to PR is the first status that you would put for any charge that you're entering. Bill to PR means bill to primary insurance. So this is an insurance claim. You will always have the first status as bill to PR. when the batching is completed, the system will change it to claim sent to PR. So, and when you want to rebill anytime, you would change it to rebill to PR. And when after rebilling, post batching, the system will automatically change to claim rebuild to PR. So this status would also be line status field will also be used for changing statuses, that is for you to rebill, or let's say if you want to set it to bill to patient anytime you want to bill to patient anytime, you can change that to bill to patient as well. Now, but always, as I said, it would be the first status would always be the bill to PR status. And again, when you add a new line, you can enter the next code and the procedure and date of service and amounts. You also have fields here for entering the remarks 80 and 81 CC. And to the right of it is the attending provider. This is where you can select the attending provider. Now, do note the attending provider has to be there in your referring list. The referring list is in the advanced setup referring provider screen. So you got to make sure if you don't see an attending provider in the list, make sure that that attending provider and NPI for that provider is added in the advanced setup referring provider. Now, there are many other fields that are available on the referring provider setup screen, but those may not be mandatory for you to submit. But the referring provider name, NPI, and taxonomy is something that you want to make sure you have it entered in that field. So I'm going to type and select that one of the referring providers. Next, if it was a surgical procedure, you want to also select the operating provider on this field. And if there's any other providers that you want to add on the claim, you can also add that provider from this field. And that providers also would be brought from the referring provider master. You can also report the service location or facility location that the service was performed, or the bill for this service, which location it was done. You can pick the service location here. Now make sure that the service location is also added into the service location setup, which comes under the advanced setup. So once you have entered all this, the next step is to save the charge, and you can hit the save to have the charge saved. Now there is an attending provider here and also a rendering provider. The rendering provider is important for you to the rendering provider actually is the one which brings the billing information or the billing provider information from the practice setup into the UB04 UB04 billing provider information, like the field locator 1, the field locator 2. All that information comes from the rendering provider. So you want to make sure that this is selected. Of course, this is the mandatory field, but it is also important that you pick the attending provider as well. So you would have to pick both the rendering as well as the attending. Many of the times this both may be the same, but you still have to make sure that you pick both the providers. So here I'll hit the save now, and the charge will be saved. You'll get a message, save successfully. You can see that blue message come up, save successfully. Next, you will also see a line activity tab appear, and the line activity tab will show you all the activities that occurred on the charge. Now, anytime you want to make changes to this charge, you can just open up the UB04 charge entry screen, bring up the patient, and I'm just going to refresh the screen here so that you can see it, and you will see that it comes up with a date, and you can click on the date to have the charge entered or edited. So once you make the edit, you can hit the save to have it updated. Now, there is also a repeat billing option. Now, the next time you enter a charge for this patient using this case, you would see that there's a repeat bill option that will come up. So let's just pick this provider, or let's pick the case first. So let me pick the case. So I've picked the case. You can see there's a copy last super bill option that comes up on the screen. This is for repeat bill entry. Now let's say if you want to enter a new claim for this patient with exactly the same information that was entered on the last claim, or if more or less it is the same information but you want to like make some small changes, you can always use this copy last super bill, which will, when you click on it, you can see that it'll bring everything that was in the previous claim that I entered for this patient. It has brought all that information to the current claim. And that way I can make any modifications if I need to, or just if I just want to use the same information, I can just hit save and have that charge saved. So that was about entering UB04 or institutional claims.